3 months of intensive training had transformed Morrison and his team from Earth soldiers into something entirely new. They moved through the corridors of the collective battleship, resilience with the confidence of warriors who had mastered alien technology while maintaining their human edge. The powered armor they wore was a fusion of collective engineering and human tactical requirements, providing enhanced strength, speed, and protection while maintaining the mobility and flexibility that human combat doctrine demanded. Morrison's team had grown from the original 15 humans to over 200, as more Earth soldiers were recruited and integrated into what the collective now called the Human Integration Protocol. But it was Morrison's original squad that had become the template for all human operations, the proof of concept that was about to be tested in the most brutal way possible. The briefing room was packed with both human and alien personnel. Morrison found himself standing next to Commander Zeppelin, a collective officer whose species resembled a cross between a dolphin and a praying mantis. Despite their physical differences, Morrison had developed a deep respect for the alien commander, who had proven to be both tactically sound and willing to listen to human suggestions. Intelligence indicates a Devourer advance force has established a forward operating base on Kepler 442b, Zeppelin announced, her translated voice carrying the weight of impending action. Approximately 5,000 enemy combatants, along with breeding facilities and resource extraction equipment. The holographic display showed an Earth-like world, its surface scarred by the geometric patterns that indicated Devourer occupation. Morrison had seen similar patterns in the intelligence briefings, but seeing them on what should have been a living world still made his jaw clench with anger. Standard collective doctrine would call for orbital bombardment followed by a full-scale invasion with overwhelming force, Zeppelin continued. However, human tactical analysis suggests a different approach. Morrison stepped forward, activating his own display controls. Orbital bombardment won't work against Devourers. They dig deep, they adapt quickly, and they're willing to sacrifice 90% of their force to preserve the core breeding population. A conventional invasion would cost us thousands of soldiers and still might not eliminate the threat. The display shifted to show Morrison's proposed operation. Instead, we use a small, fast insertion team to infiltrate their primary facility. The Devourers have never encountered human stealth tactics or improvised explosives. We get in, plant nuclear charges at key structural points, and collapse their entire underground complex. A murmur of concern rippled through the assembled collective officers. Admiral Keffer, the overall mission commander, leaned forward. This plan requires the insertion team to be inside the facility when the charges detonate. It is a suicide mission. No, sir, Morrison replied calmly. It's a mission with acceptable risk levels, assuming proper execution and contingency planning. My team has run variations of this operation dozens of times in simulation. We know how to get in and get out. The simulations cannot account for all variables, Keffer objected. The Devourers are unpredictable. Rodriguez, who had been promoted to Morrison's second-in-command, spoke up. That's exactly why this will work. They're unpredictable, which means they don't follow standard security protocols. They rely on overwhelming force and intimidation rather than careful defense. It's their strength and their weakness. Morrison could see the doubt in the collective officers' faces. Despite 3 months of successful training exercises, many of them still viewed humans as reckless and primitive. They couldn't understand that what they saw as recklessness was actually calculated risk assessment based on years of combat experience. Give us the mission, Morrison said simply. If we fail, you can still fall back on orbital bombardment. But if we succeed, you save thousands of lives and prove that human tactics work against Devourer forces. Admiral Keffer was silent for a long moment, his insectoid features impossible to read. Finally, he nodded, approved, but you will take a mixed team. Human operators supported by collective specialists. Understood, Morrison agreed. Though he had already planned for that contingency. 6 hours later, Morrison found himself in the drop bay of a stealth insertion craft, checking his equipment one final time. His team consisted of 8 humans and 4 collective soldiers, all volunteers who had trained extensively in human tactical methods. The aliens still moved with the precise, almost mechanical efficiency that characterized their species, but Morrison was pleased to see they had learned to adapt their movements to the more fluid, improvisational style of human warfare. The pilot's voice crackled through their comm systems. Approaching drop zone. Devourer sensors are active, but our stealth systems should keep us undetected for another 12 minutes. Morrison activated his team's tactical network. Remember, once we're on the ground, we move fast and quiet. Devourers are strong and tough, but they're also overconfident. They won't be expecting an infiltration team because none of the collective species have ever tried it before. Chun, now leading his own squad of human-alien hybrids, checked his weapons one final time. The rifles they carried were modified collective energy weapons, redesigned for human ergonomics and combat doctrine. More importantly, each team member carried a pack of what Morrison privately called human surprises, improvised explosive devices, flashbang grenades, and other equipment that existed nowhere in collective military doctrine. 30 seconds to drop, the pilot announced. Morrison looked at his team, seeing the familiar mixture of fear and excitement that preceded any dangerous operation. The aliens looked nervous but determined. The humans looked like they were going to a party. "Just remember," Morrison said as the drop bay doors opened, "we're not just fighting for Earth anymore. We're fighting for the entire galaxy." "No pressure," Rodriguez grinned. "I've had pressure. This is just Tuesday." They dropped into the night. Sky of Kepler 442 be like falling stars, their stealth systems rendering them nearly invisible to devourer sensors. Morrison felt the familiar rush of a combat insertion, his senses hyperalert, his mind processing dozens of variables simultaneously. This was what he had been born to do. The landing zone was 2 kilometers from the main devourer facility, in an area of rough terrain that would provide cover for their approach. Morrison's intelligence indicated that the devourers relied heavily on automated defense systems, but those systems were designed to detect large-scale attacks, not small infiltration teams. They landed without incident and quickly regrouped. Morrison took point, leading them through the rocky landscape toward their target. The alien world smelled wrong, tainted by the chemical byproducts of devourer occupation. In the distance, he could see the geometric scars on the landscape where the invaders had begun their resource extraction operations. As they moved closer to the facility, Morrison began to hear something that made his blood run cold. It was a sound he had never heard before, but somehow recognized on a primal level. The sound of thousands of devourers communicating with each other, a constant buzzing, chittering noise that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. Through his scope, Morrison got his first real look at living devourers. The intelligence photos hadn't done them justice. They were even more terrifying in person, massive insectoid creatures that moved with predatory grace despite their size. He watched one of them tear through a steel barrier with its bare claws, treating the metal like paper. "Target facility is 200 meters ahead," Morrison whispered into his comm. "I count 12 perimeter guards, but they're not really guarding. More like patrolling for entertainment." It was true. The devourers weren't following any recognizable patrol pattern. They wandered around seemingly at random, occasionally stopping to fight with each other for no apparent reason. Morrison realized that the collective's intelligence assessments had been wrong about one crucial thing. Devourers weren't disciplined soldiers. They were barely controlled predators that gave him an idea. "Change of plans," he announced. "We're not sneaking past the guards, we're going to use them." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "Come again?" Morrison pointed to where 2 devourers were, engaged in what looked like a dominance display, snarling and slashing at each other while their companions watched with apparent interest. "They're territorial, aggressive, easily distracted. Chun, I want you and your squad to create a disturbance on the east side of the facility. Make some noise, get their attention, let them think they're being attacked. While they're distracted, the rest of us go in the back door," Rodriguez finished with understanding. Classic misdirection, exactly. But here's the twist. We're not just going to plant charges and leave. We're going to study them. Learn how they fight, how they think, how they can be beaten. This is intelligence gathering as much as it is sabotage. The plan worked better than Morrison had dared hope. Chune's squad created a series of small explosions on the eastern perimeter, and within minutes, hundreds of Devourers were rushing toward the disturbance, abandoning their posts to join what they perceived as a fight. The facility's rear entrance was left virtually undefended. Morrison's team slipped inside like ghosts. The interior of the Devourer facility. The transport ship was unlike anything Morrison had ever seen. The interior walls seemed to pulse with a faint organic light, and the floor beneath his feet felt warm and slightly yielding, like he was walking on living tissue. The aliens had separated the prisoners into smaller groups, with Morrison finding himself in a chamber with 15 other humans, all military personnel from various branches and special forces units, staff. Sergeant Maria Rodriguez from the Rangers sat across from him, her dark eyes constantly scanning their surroundings for potential escape routes. Next to her was Captain David Chun, a Marine Force recon officer whose jaw was set in grim determination. The others were equally impressive, all elite soldiers who had proven themselves in combat. Morrison began to see a pattern in who had been selected. The aliens had been very specific in their recruitment. These weren't random prisoners of war. They were some of Earth's most experienced and capable warriors. A soft chime echoed through the chamber, and suddenly the air in front of them shimmered. A holographic display materialized, showing star charts that Morrison didn't recognize. One of the aliens, the same one who had captured Morrison, entered the chamber and approached the display. To Morrison's surprise, when the alien spoke, he could understand it. "Your language has been downloaded and integrated into our communication systems," the alien said, its voice a strange mixture of mechanical precision and organic warmth. "You will refer to me as Combat Leader Vexstar. You are no longer prisoners. You are recruits. Recruits for what?" Rodriguez demanded, her hand instinctively moving toward where her sidearm should have been. Vexstar's 4 eyes focused on her with what might have been approval. "Direct, aggressive, good qualities for what is to come." The alien gestured to the star chart. "Your species calls this galaxy the Milky Way. For the past 3,000 years, it has been protected by the Galactic Defense Collective, an alliance of 47 different species working together to maintain peace and security." The hologram shifted, showing different star systems, some marked in green, others in ominous red. 6 months ago, our long-range scouts detected an invasion force approaching from the Andromeda Galaxy. The Devourers, we call them. They consume entire worlds, stripping them of all life and resources before moving on to the next target. They have already destroyed 12 galaxies. Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. The scope of what Vexstar was describing was almost impossible to comprehend. "The collective has fought them before," Vexstar continued. "We have superior technology, better coordination, more resources. But we have one critical weakness that the Devourers exploit." "What weakness?" Chun asked. "We are civilized," Vexstar replied simply. "Our warriors train in simulation chambers. They study combat theory. They practice formations and tactics. But very few of our soldiers have actually killed. Very few have looked death in the face and continued fighting. Most of our species evolved beyond the need for violence long ago." The implications hit Morrison like a physical blow. "You're saying your people don't know how to really fight? Not in the way that matters when facing an enemy that shows no mercy, takes no prisoners, and fights with the desperation of those who have nothing left to lose," Vexstar confirmed. "The Devourers are excellent warriors because they have been at war for millennia. They know no other existence." Rodriguez leaned forward. "So you came to Earth because humans know how to fight dirty?" "Because humans know how to survive," Vexstar corrected. "Your species has spent its entire evolutionary history at war. With each other, with your environment, with extinction itself. You have developed something that most collective species lost long ago, the killer instinct." The hologram shifted again, showing footage of human conflicts throughout history. Ancient battles, medieval warfare, world wars, modern combat operations. Morrison saw himself and his teammates among the images. Footage from operations he didn't even know had been recorded. We have been watching your species for decades, studying your military doctrine, your tactics, your ability to adapt under pressure. You fight wars with weapons that should be obsolete against enemies with superior numbers, in conditions that would break most other species. And you win, not always, Chun pointed out grimly. But you survive. Even in defeat, some of you always survive. And survivors learn. They adapt. They become harder to kill. Vextar's tone carried something that might have been respect. The collective has decided that if we are to have any chance against the Devourers, we need teachers. Warriors who can show our soldiers what it truly means to fight. Morrison stood up, his mind racing. You want us to train your army? I want you to become part of our army, Vextar replied. Human squads integrated with collective forces. Your tactical knowledge combined with our technology. Your experience guiding our raw recruits, and if we refuse? Rodriguez asked. Vextar was quiet for a moment. Then your world dies along with the rest of the galaxy when the Devourers arrive? Their advance force will reach your solar system in approximately 18 months. The chamber fell silent as the weight of that statement sank in. Morrison looked at his fellow prisoners, seeing his own thoughts reflected in their faces. They were being asked to help defend not just Earth, but the entire galaxy against an enemy that had already destroyed 12 others. Show us, Morrison said finally. Show us these Devourers. The hologram changed again, and Morrison immediately wished he hadn't asked. The creatures that appeared in the display were nightmarish, insectoid beings the size of small buildings. They moved in vast swarms, tearing through defensive lines like paper. The footage showed collective soldiers, many of them recognizably humanoid, being overwhelmed by the sheer savagery of the attack. But it wasn't just the physical appearance of the Devourers that was terrifying. It was the way they fought. No formations, no tactics, just pure, relentless aggression. They threw themselves at enemy positions with complete disregard for their own lives, using their own dead as stepping stones to reach their targets. They don't retreat, Vextar explained. They don't negotiate. They don't take prisoners. They consume everything in their path and move on. Our conventional military doctrine is useless against them. Morrison watched the footage, analyzing the enemy's movements, their attack patterns, their apparent weaknesses. They're not disciplined, he observed. They're like a natural disaster given physical form. You can't fight them with traditional military tactics because they don't follow any rules. Exactly, Vextar agreed. Which is why we need soldiers who know how to improvise. Who can think outside established doctrine? Who can fight dirty when necessary? Rodriguez stood up, her decision made. What do you need us to do? First, you train with our technology. Learn our weapons, our equipment, our capabilities. Then you help us design new training programs for our recruits. Finally, you lead mixed units into combat against Devourer advanced scouts. Wait, Chun interrupted. They're already here? Small scouting parties, yes. They arrive ahead of the main force to assess planetary defenses and identify high-value targets. We've been hunting them for months, but they're proving difficult to eliminate. Morrison felt a familiar excitement building in his chest. Despite the overwhelming nature of their situation, this was what he had trained for his entire career. An enemy that needed to be stopped, and the skills to potentially stop them? We'll need to see your current training facilities, he said. Meet your soldiers? Understand their capabilities and limitations. Already arranged, Vextar replied. But first, you must understand something important. Once you agree to join the collective, there is no going back to your previous lives. You will be fighting a war that spans galaxies, facing an enemy unlike anything your species has ever encountered. Many of you will not survive. Morrison looked around the chamber at his fellow humans. He saw fear in their faces, but also determination. These were soldiers who had already accepted the possibility of death in service of something greater than themselves. The scale might be different, but the principle was the same. We're in, he said without hesitation. But we do this our way. Human tactics, human leadership structure, human methods of operation. You provide the technology and support, we provide the knowledge and experience. Vexstar's expression was unreadable, but Morrison thought he detected approval in the alien's posture. Agreed, but you should know that many in the collective are skeptical of this arrangement. They see humans as primitive, violent, unpredictable. You will need to prove yourselves worthy of the trust we are placing in you. We've been proving ourselves our entire lives, Rodriguez said with a grin that was more predatory than friendly. What's one more test? The transport shuddered slightly, and Morrison felt a subtle sensation of deceleration. They were arriving somewhere, presumably the collective's primary military installation. One more thing, Vexstar said as the chamber's exit began to iris open. The collective operates on principles of honor, cooperation, and mutual respect. Human military culture is ... different. You will need to learn to work within our social structure. Morrison exchanged glances with his teammates. He could see the same thought in their eyes that was running through his mind. The aliens might have superior technology and noble principles, but they clearly didn't. Master Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison had seen combat in 12 different countries, survived 3 tours in Afghanistan, and earned enough medals to weigh down a small child. But nothing in his 20-year military career had prepared him for this moment. He crouched behind the twisted wreckage of what used to be a Humvee, watching through his scope as massive, bipedal creatures moved through the ruins of forward operating base, crimson like they owned the place. The invasion had started 6 hours ago. No warning, no demands, no communication of any kind. Just ships appearing in Earth's atmosphere like dark thunderclouds, followed by these things dropping from the sky in pods that hit the ground with the force of meteorites. The alien stood nearly 8 feet tall, with thick, gray skin that seemed to absorb bullets like a sponge soaks up water. Their faces were angular, almost geometric, with 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern that gave them an unsettling, predatory look. Morrison's team had been conducting a training exercise when the first reports came in. Now half his squad was dead, the other half scattered across the compound, and he was down to his last magazine. The creatures moved with purpose, systematically destroying everything human-made they encountered. They carried weapons that fired some kind of energy beam, turning concrete to slag and metal to vapor with ease. Through his earpiece, Morrison heard the panicked voices of soldiers across the base. They're in the armory. Medical bay is gone. We need immediate evac. But no help was coming. Every military installation within 100 miles was reporting the same thing. Earth's conventional forces were being rolled up like a cheap carpet. One of the aliens stepped into view, its weapon scanning the area where Morrison was hidden. The SEAL held his breath, finger on the trigger of his M4. He'd gotten lucky earlier, putting 3 rounds center mass into one of these things, only to watch it stumble slightly before continuing its advance like nothing had happened. Their body armor, if that's what it was, seemed to be integrated into their skin somehow, that the alien's diamond-shaped array of eyes locked onto Morrison's position. For a moment, they stared at each other across 30 yards of rubble-strewn ground. Morrison could see intelligence in those alien features, cold calculation mixed with something that might have been curiosity. The creature tilted its head, studying the human like a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. Morrison knew he was outgunned, outmatched, and probably about to die. But he was a Navy SEAL, and SEALs don't go quietly. He rolled from cover, bringing his rifle up as he moved. The alien's weapon was already tracking him, but Morrison had spent years training for moments like this. His first shot took the creature in what he hoped was its center of mass. The second and third followed in quick succession. The alien staggered backward, dark fluid spattering from the wounds. For a moment, Morrison thought he might have actually heard it. Then the creature's wounds began to close, the flesh knitting together like time-lapse footage of healing. Within seconds, it was as good as new, the alien's weapon discharged with a sound like tearing metal. Morrison dove behind a concrete barrier as the energy beam vaporized the spot where he'd been standing. Heat washed over him, and he could smell his own singed hair. He popped up to return fire, but the alien was already moving. Covering ground with a loping gait that was deceptively fast, Morrison emptied his magazine into the advancing creature, watching his rounds impact without effect. He reached for a fresh mag, but the alien was on him before he could reload. A massive hand, easily twice the size of Morrison's own, grabbed him by the front of his tactical vest and lifted him off the ground like he weighed nothing. Up close, Morrison could see details that terrified him. The alien's skin wasn't just gray. It was covered in what looked like tiny scales or perhaps some kind of organic armor plating. Its breath smelled like ozone and burnt metal. The four eyes studying him held an intelligence that was utterly foreign yet somehow familiar. This wasn't a mindless monster. It was a soldier just like him. The alien said something in its own language. A series of clicks and whistles that Morrison's brain couldn't even begin to process. When Morrison didn't respond, the creature seemed to consider this for a moment. Then it drew back its free hand and struck him across the face with what felt like a sledgehammer wrapped in sandpaper. Morrison saw stars, tasted blood, and felt his consciousness waver. The alien's grip shifted, and suddenly Morrison was flying through the air. He crashed into the side of a supply container hard enough to dent the metal, then crumpled to the ground in a heap. Every bone in his body felt like it had been jarred loose, and his vision swam with black spots. The alien approached slowly. Almost casually, its weapon pointed at Morrison but not firing. It was saying something again, those same clicks and whistles, but now there was a different tone to it. Almost like it was asking a question. Morrison spat blood and tried to push himself up on his elbows. His left arm wasn't responding properly, and he suspected he had at least 3 broken ribs. The alien stopped about 10 feet away and continued its incomprehensible speech. When Morrison still didn't respond, the creature seemed to become agitated. It gestured with its weapon, then at Morrison, then at the destruction around them. "I don't understand you," Morrison gasped, surprised that he could still speak. The alien went very still. It took a step closer, head tilted in that same curious angle. It spoke again, slower this time, enunciating each click and whistle with exaggerated care. Morrison shook his head weakly. The alien's agitation increased. It began pacing back and forth, occasionally looking at Morrison and speaking in what sounded like increasingly frustrated tones. Finally, it stopped and did something Morrison didn't expect. It set down its weapon. The creature approached Morrison with its hands visible, empty, held slightly away from its body. When it was close enough to touch, it knelt down and placed one massive hand on Morrison's chest, just over his heart. The alien's skin was warm, almost hot, and Morrison could feel a subtle vibration through the contact. Like electricity flowing just beneath the surface, the alien closed its 4 eyes and seemed to concentrate. Morrison felt a strange, tingling sensation spreading from where the creature touched him. The pain in his ribs began to fade, and his broken arm suddenly felt functional again. In seconds, his injuries were completely healed. Morrison stared at the alien in shock. It had just healed him. Why? What did it want? The alien picked up its weapon and pointed it at Morrison again, but it didn't fire. Instead, it backed away and gestured toward a path leading deeper into the base. It wanted Morrison to move in that direction. Morrison got to his feet, amazed that he felt no pain. The alien had healed him completely, but it was still clearly in control. It was taking him prisoner, but why heal him first? Why not just kill him like it had done to so many others? As they walked through the destroyed base, Morrison saw the full extent of the damage. Buildings reduced to rubble, vehicles melted into unrecognizable shapes, and bodies everywhere. The aliens had been thorough, but they hadn't killed everyone. Morrison saw other survivors being herded along by more of the creatures, all of them looking just as confused and terrified as he felt. They were being collected. But for what purpose? The alien behind Morrison prodded him forward with its weapon whenever he slowed down. They passed through what used to be the command center, now a crater filled with twisted metal and broken concrete. Morrison's mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. The aliens clearly had superior technology and physical capabilities. They could have simply wiped out every human on Earth from orbit if that's what they wanted. But they hadn't. They were taking prisoners instead. That suggested they wanted something from humanity. Information, maybe. Or perhaps they needed humans alive for some other reason. Morrison had participated in enough interrogations to know that dead people don't talk. These aliens might be trying to learn about human military capabilities, or maybe they were looking for something specific. The thought gave Morrison a small spark of hope. If the aliens wanted information, that meant humans had some value to them. And if humans had value, there might be room for negotiation, for resistance, for finding some way to fight back. The alien guided Morrison toward a large clearing, where dozens of other human prisoners were being held. Men and women in military uniforms, civilian contractors, even a few locals who had been working on the base. They all looked shell-shocked, staring at their captors with a mixture of fear and confusion. Morrison noticed that some of the prisoners were wounded, but none of them seemed to be seriously injured. The aliens were apparently healing their captives, just as they had healed him. That reinforced his theory that they wanted the humans alive and functional. An alien that was slightly larger than the others stood in the center of the clearing, observing the prisoners. Its skin had a different texture, more metallic, and it wore what might have been armor or some kind of technological implant across its chest. Morrison guessed this was their leader. The leader alien spoke in that same clicking, whistling language, and all the other creatures stopped what they were doing to listen. Whatever it said, it seemed to be important. Several of the aliens moved to new positions around the perimeter of the clearing, while